Good evening all. I'm Faisal Islam, Sky News' political editor. Delighted to welcome you to Chatham House today. You'll see there's a camera at the back, so just for your knowledge, if you hadn't worked it out and deduced it, the event is being recorded. In fact, it's being live streamed. So the other deduction of the day is that the Chatham House rule doesn't apply. But I'll be testing you on it later. People will be asking questions from the floor here, but also via social media using the hashtag #AskCH, which you can use if I don't see your hand. Could you please put your phones on silent? Quick introduction of the speaker. As you all know, Danny Alexander is Chief Secretary of the Treasury.
Thank you very much, Faisal, for that kind and brief introduction. But it definitely conveyed all of the facts in the simplest and shortest possible way, which I will endeavour to do with my speech as well. But I'm delighted to be here at the Royal Institute for International Affairs. Over your 94-year history, you've deservedly gained a reputation as one of the world's leading think tanks on international relations and global governance issues. And your staff and your membership play a hugely important role, not only through the analysis and research that you bring out, but also by encouraging the exchange of views and the promulgation of new ideas. And so it's always very useful for someone in my position to have the chance to discuss policy issues with groups like this. You are, if you like, the global hub for new thinking on international affairs. And as a Liberal Democrat, I'm a huge believer in the importance of international cooperation. Liberalism, in a way, is internationalism, and nationalism, which I'm going to talk about a bit this evening, is its antithesis, I think. So it won't have escaped your attention that a referendum is soon to take place in Scotland. Well, hands up if it has escaped your attention. I don't think you can avoid it. And there are just over 2 weeks to go until the vote on the 18th of September. For people in Scotland, people like me who'll be voting on the 18th of September, this is the most important vote in our lifetimes. It's the most important vote that I will ever cast in my life. And in some respects, it's the most important vote in the history of the United Kingdom, because it's the very future of the United Kingdom as a country that is at stake. It comes after almost 2 years of debate, research, campaigning from both sides. As you've seen, the polls look like they're getting tighter as we get closer. That's to be expected. But I'm convinced that our arguments about the reasons why Scotland is better off in the UK will win through, because I believe that there is a quiet majority in Scotland who understand and believe that as part of the United Kingdom, we have the best of both worlds. As part of the UK, there'll be more jobs and stronger growth. Public services will be more affordable. The currency, too, has been an issue. I'm sure you haven't missed that one. For only as part of the United Kingdom will we in Scotland get to use the pound as our currency with all of the institutions that make the pound a success. Staying in the UK means cheaper household bills and safer pensions. Within the UK, as I say, Scottish people have the best of both worlds, with responsibility in Holyrood, in Edinburgh, for the issues that matter the most in Scotland, the domestic political issues, but part of a bigger political system across the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, each and every one of those issues has got plenty of airtime, and no doubt will continue to do. But there are other issues which perhaps have not been discussed as much, and one of these relates to the implications of independence for Scotland's place in the world, which I must admit I do find curious, because as I hope to explain to you tonight, and we can debate and discuss, within the UK, Scotland has been hugely influential on the global stage. As part of the UK, we are one of the big 4 EU members and can influence the key decisions. As part of the UK, we have greater global influence, a seat at the top table. As part of the UK, we use our global reach to support Scottish people and businesses. And all of that means, I think, on these key international issues, the implications for Scotland, if we are to become a separate state, will be very significant indeed. First of all, there's the question about Scotland's membership of the European Union. On the record as a government minister, I am a passionate believer in British membership of the European Union. I'll come back to that in a little while. As a separate state, Scotland would have to apply to join the European Union all over again. That would mean negotiating terms with all 28 EU member states. And as you can imagine, many of you in this room have been involved in this in different ways. That would be a complex and lengthy process. Don't take my word for it if you like. The outgoing president of the European Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, in February of this year, made it abundantly clear when he said, it will be extremely difficult to get the approval of all the other member states to have a new member coming from one member state. The Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, was equally clear last year when he said, and again I quote, bless you, it is very clear to me, as it is for everyone, that a region that obtains independence, which is part of a nation state of the EU, will stay outside the EU. Now let's leave to one side the fact that a prolonged period of entry negotiations would generate significant levels of uncertainty, which would of course have an impact on confidence and business activity, and that just as the economic recovery in the United Kingdom is starting to take off. And the truth is that even if Scotland managed to get into the EU, and with some caveats that I'll enter later, I assume that it probably would, it would be on significantly worse terms than those currently enjoyed by the UK today. Let me set out why. The UK's membership of the European Union doesn't come for free. We contribute to the EU budget like every member state. As Chief Secretary over the last 4.5, nearly 5 years, I've been very involved in that issue. And as you know, those combined contributions are then distributed throughout the EU based on 7-year budget agreements. In terms of paying in, every nation contributes according to their national income. And then in terms of receiving money back, there are 2 main programs, structural and cohesion funds and the common agricultural policy. Both of those funds have had a significant impact in Scotland. In Glasgow, the structural funds have helped turn old buildings like the town hall into new cultural and digital projects. In the Highlands, I've seen firsthand how the structural funds have had an even bigger impact. But on top of those 2 funds, the UK also receives a unique rebate on our contributions. Looking across these 3 sources of funding, the bottom line is that outside of the UK, Scotland would pay more and get less. On structural funds, Scotland would lose out on around £200 million over this 7-year spending round. But the most important loss for Scotland comes from the rebate. And the UK rebate is worth over £3 billion a year. It's not an annual lump sum that can be divided. If Scotland voted for separation, the rebate would go to the continuing UK, not Scotland. And of course, it would be adjusted for the size of the continuing UK economy and the share of UK receipts. There'd be no Scottish share left. An independent Scotland, therefore, if it managed to get into the EU, would find itself in the bizarre position of having to contribute some €640 million over 7 years to the UK's rebate, just like every other member state does. So rather than getting a rebate from the EU, Scotland would be giving a rebate to the rest of the UK. It's not an argument you hear Alex Salmond make very often. And that is not all. I think it's clear from all the analysis I've seen that Scotland would be highly unlikely, would not get all of the other opt-outs that the UK currently enjoys. Because all new EU member states in recent years have and must commit to joining both the Euro and Schengen, which means that unlike the UK, Scotland would not have control over currency and all the other issues that are related. There'd certainly be a lot to negotiate on. Now, I mentioned the issue of currency, and I will just want to dwell on it for a moment. The nationalists say that they'll be able to continue using the UK pound even if they become a separate state. Because even if the rest of the UK doesn't agree to a currency union, they have said that Scotland would use the pound without a formal agreement. It's an arrangement known as sterlingisation, which would mean that Scotland would not have a central bank to set interest rates or act as a lender of last resort. Now, this is not only a bonkers idea which flies in the face of any reasonable notion of what independence means, and which would impose costs and risks on people and businesses in Scotland. It's also incompatible with Scotland's smooth re-entry into the EU. And I'll tell you why. Today I'm publishing an exchange of letters between myself and Olli Rehn, the former European Commissioner, relating to the issue of Scottish independence. Until a few weeks ago, he was the man at the EU Commission in charge of economic and monetary affairs, including the euro. He's very clear on one point, and I quote, "As to the question whether sterlingisation were compatible with EU membership, The answer is that this would simply not be possible, he says. No country has ever joined the EU while using only the currency of another country at the point of accession. As Ollie says in his letter, in 2008, the then Icelandic government requested the possibility of a unilateral euroization of the krona to stabilize its monetary conditions and as a shortcut to EU membership. The Commission's response, they flatly rejected it as against the treaty. This was exactly the same case for Montenegro in 2007, which was required to create its own monetary authority as part of the conditions of the EU. There is a strong assumption in the EU treaties that every member state will have its own central bank. But under sterlingization, Scotland would not have a central bank or control over its monetary policy. So let's recap on the facts. First, there will not be a currency union in the event of a yes vote, because it would expose the rest of the UK to risks it couldn't control and would leave Scotland without the tools to steer its economy through a very risky and uncertain time. One of Alex Salmond's 3 plan Bs is sterlingization, borrowing the pound, but without any access to the support or stability provided by the Bank of England. Today we learn that option is incompatible with EU membership. So an independent Scotland would face a simple choice: using the pound, like Panama uses the dollar, or joining the EU. It can't have both. This shows to me yet again that the nationalists' failure to put forward a credible currency plan and the dangers that failure poses to Scotland. It's just one of the many inconsistencies and contradictions inherent in the case that they make. Another one is this. Faced with growing scepticism about Europe, the nationalists want to put up a border with the rest of the UK, an EU member state, so they can secure their future within the EU. It's not logical. To me, it's clear that there is no real threat of the UK leaving the European Union. I suppose it won't surprise anyone here to hear that I am a strong supporter of the EU. But in fact, all the 3 main political parties, Liberal Democrats, Conservatives and Labour, are in favour of continued EU membership. Even if there is a referendum on the UK's EU membership, I believe that the economic case is so powerful across investment, trade and jobs that the people of the United Kingdom would vote to stay in. I don't think the EU is perfect, far from it, but I think we are at our best when we're at its centre. I want Scotland to be part of that strong UK presence within the EU so that we can retain the loud and persuasive voice that the UK rightly commands across Europe. But of course, EU membership is just one example. There are many other international organisations where an independent Scotland would have a diminished voice. What about, say, the United Nations? As part of the UK, Scottish views, Scottish values are represented by one of the founder members with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. And while an independent Scotland could eventually join the family of the United Nations, it would not have that permanent seat and the influence that it brings. You at Chatham House know better than most how crucially important the UK's permanent seat on the UN Security Council really is, and how it's helped to deliver peacekeeping missions across every continent over the decades. And that's before we take into account the UN's specialised agencies like UNESCO or the World Health Organization. I could set out similar arguments about many other international organisations, the G7, the G8, G20, the IMF and the World Bank, NATO and the Commonwealth. In each of these institutions, the United Kingdom is able to punch above its weight. Because of our historic role in world affairs, we're able to use our power to enhance our country's security and prosperity. We're able to promote the values that are dear to us, whether we're Scots, English, Welsh, or Northern Irish, like freedom, democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights. And we're able to help end poverty and save lives during humanitarian crises. In short, as the UK, we're able to make the world a better place. The principles underpinning that approach are quintessentially British and Scottish too. As part of the UK, Scotland has played a crucial part in some of the most important world events in recent years. The G8 summit in 2005 held in Gleneagles in Scotland, when the UK led the world to cancel the debt of the world's most highly indebted poor countries. The G20 summit in London in 2009, when a Scottish Prime Minister led the world in agreeing a plan to attempt to boost the global economy at the height of the world financial crisis. And last year, the UK coalition government, with myself, a Scot, involved, led the G8 in agreeing international standards to improve the taxation of multinational corporations. But to make a difference, history and intent are not enough. In international affairs, size does matter. As a bigger economy, the UK can do so much more than Scotland alone. For example, the UK is the second largest aid donor in the world. We're also the first G7 country to have met the target of spending 0.7% of gross national income on overseas aid, one of my proudest achievements in the coalition government. The UK has the biggest defence budget in the EU, the second largest in NATO, and for centuries, Scottish people have been at the heart of our armed forces. The UK's integrated approach to defence not only protects all parts of the UK, it allows us to contribute to conflict prevention and humanitarian operations overseas. To me, it is clear, as a United Kingdom, we get a seat on all the most important international tables, and we can put our values, British values, Scottish values, at the centre of those decisions. And our greater size and wider reach not only help when it comes to diplomacy, humanitarian work, disaster relief, it also helps Scottish companies succeed in the global marketplace. As the United Kingdom, we have a successful network of embassies and trade bodies across the world. This opens up the whole globe for Scots to travel and do business in with government support. The UK's diplomatic network employs over 14,000 people in 267 embassies, high commissions and consulates in 145 countries and 12 overseas territories around the world. On top of that, the UK works internationally to protect and promote the economic interests of businesses based in Scotland. We benefit from access to and the promotional activity of UK TI offices, 169 of them in over 100 countries. That is one reason why Scottish produce is so well known around the world. Whether it's promoting Scotch whisky in the Far East, selling Harris Tweed across Europe, or marketing Aberdeen Angus beef, the UK provides a launchpad to help those uniquely Scottish goods go global. That international success would be harder to achieve for an independent Scotland. There'd be a lengthy and expensive process to set up its own diplomatic, consular, trade and other international services. New relationships would have to be formed, new systems put in place. We don't need to do that because as part of the UK, we benefit from those economies of scale and we can use our deep pockets to widen our international economic influence. So in conclusion, let me say that when it comes to the EU, to our global influence, to our economic reach, the UK really gives us as Scots an ability to punch way above our weight internationally, to fight for Scottish interests across the world, to promote Scottish values across the world, and to export Scottish products across the world. It's one of the many powerful reasons why we're better, stronger, more influential as part of the United Kingdom, and I hope we'll stay that way. Thank you for listening.
So, well, I'll just start up the questioning quickly. Give us a sense of where you think the campaign is right now. We had the poll this morning, was it 53-47, closer than it's ever been on from that polling company. I mean, is there some concern? There's been a lot of confidence over the summer. I think a famous Scot once called it squeaky bum time.
It's not an expression that I would use, not in this august company anyhow. I've always thought that this is a tight race. But equally, as I said, I've always thought that there is a quiet majority of Scots who want to keep the UK together. And, you know, these polls move around and we all get a bit too obsessed with individual polls and how they change. But we are in that final phase of the campaign where the kind of arguments are being crystallised to their, most direct form. And where, we have absolutely to work as hard as we can to get every vote out. And so if there was anybody who was in any way complacent about the result of the referendum, and I was never one of them, then I hope that this poll will remind people that there's a huge job to do in the weeks to come if we're to keep the UK together.
If you drill down into those poll numbers, and I realise that the significance of some of these small groups wanes and the margin of error goes up, but it is quite intriguing to see majority of men seem to be saying yes. All of the age groups, bar over 60s, I mean, it's just, but I mean, it's quite striking that on this latest poll, 16 to 24s, 25s to 39s, 40 to 59 have varying degrees of majority for yes. I mean, I mean, even if and the no vote is being carried, if you like, by the over 60s, that creates something quite an interesting dynamic in this debate, does it not?
Well, I have to say that analysis is not borne out by my own experience at all. And I've spent a lot of time campaigning over the summer, and not much summer holiday, but that's fine because this is too important to, not to work every hour at. I've found, talking to young people in schools and so on, that actually young people are amongst the most committed to no votes. And there have been a lot of debates in high schools around Scotland. As you know, 16 and 17-year-olds have the vote in this referendum. I think 16 and 17-year-olds should have the vote in every election. One of the most intelligent discussions I've had about politics have been in those fora. And those schools' debates have almost all shown strong majorities for no, because that generation is concerned about what does this mean for jobs, for economic opportunities, for what is the what is the world I'm going to enter into going to be like. And also that generation, their world is not limited by international borders in the kind of 19th century way that nationalism basically follows. It's a world of, you've got your iPad there, it's a world of sort of Facebook and Twitter and opportunities and all and connections in all parts of the world. And in that sense, I think that the idea of erecting a new international border on this small island of ours is such a backward-looking idea. We'll have to see what the actual result is, and I don't take anything for granted. All I'd say is my own experience of younger voters is very different to the characterisation in this poll.
And the one big critique following the last debate, which didn't really go your way last Monday, was that the no campaign is essentially quite negative. This Project Fear name, basically scaring people, trying to say to people it's a risk, you don't want to go for that, without actually constructing a positive alternative of why it's better together.
Well, I reject that criticism. I mean, I think you heard in my speech both some negatives and some positives. Some big benefits that we as Scots gain as part of the European Union, but quite reasonably pointing out the risks and dangers of independence. I don't call that Project Fear, I call that Project Fact, because 18 months ago I started the Treasury on a process of undertaking this very detailed Scotland analysis programme. The job was to try and create a very rich body of data to help inform the referendum campaign. I think 13 reports and about 1,500 pages of work later, we have the most detailed and in-depth analysis of Scotland's place in the United Kingdom that I think has ever existed. I'm sure people in this room have read every page, and I'll quiz you when you ask me questions.
I certainly have.
But what it shows is that, of course, there are deep risks that come from independence, but also that there's a huge amount to be proud of in these islands. There's a huge amount that we get from working together, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think we throw that away at our peril. I really do.
Quickly, yes or no? But you're not one of the... You can
yes
foresee...
or no, that is the...
You can foresee that Scotland could make it on its own, and there is a future for Scotland. You're just saying that the costs and the risks are too high for now.
Well,
I'm not trying to make the argument that it's impossible.
I've never said that Scotland couldn't be independent.
Right.
I think that we would be less successful, less prosperous, less influential, weaker as a country if we become independent. That doesn't mean we can't be. I just think that when you've got to compare what we gain from being part of the United Kingdom and what we lose with independence. And so I've never been one of those people who said Scotland can't be independent, that it's impossible. It clearly isn't impossible. But that we gain from working together in the UK, just like the UK gains from working together in the European Union.
Okay, well, I mean, this is quite the topic right now. I'm very lucky to have one of the key protagonists with us, so let's get some questions going. I mean, I'll try and sort of group them because it's quite a complicated series of interlocking issues. Maybe
Better get my pen out then.
Yeah. So, I mean, should we just, for the minute, let's park currency and banking. We'll go into that in a minute. But on more general referendum questions, who's got some questions on that? Well, let's take two or three at a time. Just the gentleman over there. And if you could stand up and identify yourself and your affiliation, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. The name's Ewan Grant, a former customs officer, now an independent consultant who's worked quite a lot on European Commission projects in Eastern Europe, which is a partial lead into the question. Were you being entirely truthful in the comment? If I understood, you said that Scotland would have to join Schengen. And towards the end, you made the point about an international boundary between an independent Scotland and the rest of the UK, physically England. Because after all, the UK is not in Schengen, nor is the Irish Republic. And equally, Bulgaria and Romania are in the EU, but in fact have, at least for the moment, been positively excluded from Schengen by Germany and France. So I'm wondering, are you saying that there are absolutes in the relationship with the EU and demands of the EU, where in practice these are negotiable, particularly by such paragons of democracy and integrity such as politicians in Portugal and Spain?
Okay, well, why don't we stick with that topic? Anything else on kind of Schengen, immigration, labour mobility, that type of thing? Okay,
or other EU issues, maybe.
Or an EU, what Scotland would face in an EU negotiation. Did I miss somebody? Yes, just over here. There's a microphone just coming your way. Yep.
Oh, yes, I'm the representative of the Italian Central Bank. Now, I'm a little bit puzzled by the fact, as a foreigner, it seems to me that it actually is driven by emotion more than a rational view, this fact of this independence. And the fact that I find it so strange that if you look at the figures, at least what should be realistic, not negative, as DannyAlexander just pointed out, it seems like there is an economic suicide for Scotland to be independent, because in the sense, because the figures, everything is so uncertain. So how kind of banks would say they would actually relocate in the United Kingdom? What kind of oil revenues can you really imagine for the future? It's like something like a dream of people, of men over 60, but it could be a nightmare for young people. So, and also think that there's major issues like EU membership. If Scotland is really pro-Euro, pure European Union, or you won't be a member of the European Union because it will take years to negotiations. So and this is something that sounds so weird, how actually the yes campaign is getting more and more, a kind of votes than the no. That sounds surprising. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's one just here, just the gentleman at the front.
Colin Adams.
There's just a microphone coming your way.
I'm just a dissident.
There's just a microphone coming your way. Thank you.
Hello, yes, Colin Adamson. I'm just a citizen. Is this
Yes, it's working beautifully.
A non-resident, disenfranchised Scot. I was going to pick up on this point. You mentioned you'd spent a lot of time compiling the facts, but there's the fact that had you been giving this speech elsewhere in another place, you might now be covered in eggs and needing police protection. Do you see that the campaign becoming increasingly vicious over the next few weeks? And could that, in a strange way, work to the benefit of the No party?
Okay, we'll take that at the end. Let's take the first two EU negotiation points on Schengen.
Yeah.
And on
So the point I was making, I didn't say that Scotland would have to join Schengen, but the point I was making is that there are obligations that every country who has joined the European Union in recent years have had to sign up to, the treaty obligations on economic and monetary union, for example. And so the argument that is made by the nationalists who say that every aspect of the current UK relationship with the European Union could be maintained, I think is simply untrue. I talked a lot about the rebate in my remarks. As Chief Secretary of the Treasury, I've been involved in budgetary negotiations, and I know that there is not one other member state who seeks to defend the UK rebate. There is no member state who has ever negotiated a rebate at the point of accession. It took the UK, 12 or 13 years from accession to negotiate that. No other member state has a permanent rebate. And yet, Mr. Salmond and his colleagues like to pretend that all those things can be maintained and many other things besides can be generated. And I think particularly in relation to economic and monetary union, since the euro was formed, every member state has had to accept the obligations of economic and monetary union. That's a core part of the treaties, albeit that countries have to meet the economic conditions and it takes time and so on. But I think we saw, one of the Baltic states join the euro just last year. So, constantly countries are having to fulfill those obligations. And as the lady who from the Italian Central Bank, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, said, around all of those things there's a lot of uncertainty. The time it would take to conduct these negotiations, the views of other member states would be important too. And so I think there is a very false picture being presented by the nationalists of simply slipping back into the EU on the same terms, when in fact it is a whole lot more complicated and a whole lot more risky than that. And in the end, I don't think there's any doubt at all that, a Scotland that renegotiated its entry back into the European Union would do so on terms that were considerably less advantageous than those that we enjoy at the moment.
But you do say
And that's
that
the point.
they could,
That's the point I was making.
But they could get back in. There's no. You're not saying that they can't get back in.
Well, the one thing I'm pointing out in my speech, and is the point that Ollie Rain has been made to me, which is that in his previous experience, countries that choose not to have their own currency, currency arrangements like, Montenegro at the moment, the euro circulates, doesn't have its own currency. Panama has it with the US dollar. Other countries have had these arrangements over the years. That is simply incompatible with EU membership. Now, actually,
that's only one of the Plan Bs, though, isn't it?
yeah, well, I wasn't entirely sure what all the other ones were, but there's joining the euro, there's setting up your own currency. But I think the reason this is important is obviously currency is something very fundamental. Alistair Darling said this in one of the TV debates, that as a child you learn about other countries and you learn the name of the country and its capital city and its currency. And so not to be able to give people in Scotland a clear answer to the question, what currency will we use, is a pretty fundamental gap in the analysis.
Okay, well, let's park Colin's question for a second, but we will not forget it.
I will come back. It's a very important point.
We will not forget that. We'll come back to it.
I hope you haven't got any eggs with you, Colin.
Let's talk about the currency and sterlingisation and this contention from the Ollie Wren letter about that a sterlingised Scotland could not rejoin the EU. Do you have any comments or questions about this whole currency question that's come to define the debate? Yes, okay. Gentleman at the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Proudfoot from the Canadian High Commission. Mr. Alexander, the Scottish Government has repeatedly suggested that in the absence of a currency union, it might not agree to take on its share of UK debt. What would be the implications of this and for Scotland's ability to raise money internationally?
Anything else in this area of... Maybe it's not defining a debate. Okay.
I think your question is a really important one. And to my mind, it's one of the most extraordinary things that's been said in this whole debate. And there's been quite a lot of analysis of it. That UBS, the bank, put out a report which addressed this point, in which they made the point that in the event that Scotland were to renege on its share of the debt, that would have profound consequences for a new state that, after all, would have to be raising money in the self-same bond markets from day one. Scotland, I've spent the last 4.5 years dealing with the budget deficit in the United Kingdom and trying to get our public finances in order. I know that is a challenge, but we're making good progress. But if you look at the public finances of Scotland, according to figures that were published by the Scottish Government themselves, Scotland's deficit in 2016, which they say would be the first year of independence, would be about twice the size of the UK's, and you've got these issues about oil revenues and so on, which the lady who spoke was mentioning earlier. All of those mean you already start with a significant borrowing requirement from day one. And the point that UBS were making, and with which I agree, is that the idea that you're already, as a new state, you have to build up financial credibility. It's not something that comes automatically. And if you start by saying, well, we're not meeting debt obligations that are rightfully ours, that would have a pretty catastrophic effect on your market reputation. And that has knock-on consequences in terms of interest rates, in terms of the amount of money that the government would have to pay out in terms of servicing that debt. That has a knock-on effect too for for things like the amount that we in Scotland would pay for our mortgages and our credit cards and all those things. And so in the end, I don't think it's a credible threat, because it's effectively saying that the people of Scotland would be forced to pay a very substantial economic price because Alex Salmond hadn't thought through the currency options of the country properly. And I just don't think that is credible or appropriate.
Now, speaking of Alex Salmond, I mean, he would say that this is all a giant bluff. What you've just said, it's a currency bluff. The Scottish people have called that bluff. And what's going to happen if they get to 50% in a couple of weeks' time is you're going to go and negotiate a currency union with them starting in late September.
Well, that simply isn't true. I mean, it's not just that all three of the UK's political parties and their chief finance spokespeople, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Shadow Chancellor, myself, have said that this is not something that we'd agree to. It's not just that the opinion polls show large majorities of the public not wanting to enter into a currency union, and it's not just indeed that the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury himself has said the Treasury would not advise any government to enter into such a currency union. It's about the economics of it. I mean, a currency union between a very large state and a very small state would mean that the rest of the UK was taking significant financial risks over which it wouldn't have control. Scotland's banking system is very large in relation to the size of its economy. For Scotland, and I say this as a Scot, the idea that you would embark on this incredibly risky and uncertain journey without being able to set your own interest rates, without having an exchange rate that could adjust to the inevitable volatility of oil prices, for example, and you'd be more dependent on that, having to bind your hands on tax and spending through fiscal pacts or whatever, it's just not independence. Successful currency unions also require a degree of fiscal and political union. It's that very fiscal and political union that independence seeks to dissolve. So the idea that you could then have a currency union, I think, is just impossible. And I say this in all sincerity to my fellow countrymen. Anyone who votes for independence in the belief that there will be a currency union is destined for deep disappointment.
Well, we have some representatives here from a neighbouring currency union. Anyone want to come in on this issue? Anyone want to come in more generally on the currency issue? Did you have your hand up? No, not. Okay, there's a gentleman at the back.
Hi, my name is John Norman. I work for JP Morgan. I'm quite sympathetic to your arguments because part of what I do is cover currencies and also cover interest rates. But your arguments, my arguments, they're not swaying the Scottish populace. So what do you think needs to be said in the next couple of weeks to really close the vote or to broaden the gap?
Well, I don't agree that they're not swaying voters in Scotland. And in a sense, we'll have to judge that when we see the result. I think what we have to do in this final phase of the referendum is to explain the nature of the very clear choice that people have. On the one hand, a positive choice to stay in the UK, the best of both worlds, with control over domestic policy exercised by a Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, but with the wider economic and international benefits of being part of the United Kingdom on the one hand, and on the other hand, this what I regard as economically very risky proposition of independence that doesn't have the benefits that are advertised for it and would put a lot of things that we cherish at risk. And so I think we have to spell out both sides of that ledger. It's not enough just to talk about the latter or to just talk about the former. You've got to explain both of those things. And that's what I've been doing. It's what we've been doing for some time. But look, in all these things, polls move around. We'll see. I'm sure we'll see a lot more opinion polls. That one thing is certain, and we'll no doubt hear a lot more people wanting to talk about opinion polls. But in the end, this is not a debate about opinion polls. This is the debate about the most fundamental choice that you can make as a country, and that's what I want to focus people on, and particularly the kind of irreversible nature of the choice. This is not like an election. If you don't like the MP you get or the government you get, 5 years later you get another chance. You can kick them out and put someone else in. This is a choice that's forever. And I think that will inevitably concentrate a lot of people's minds.
You referred in the penultimate answer, to the Scottish banking sector. And of course, in Scotland, the Scottish government say it's not a Scottish banking sector, it's an international banking sector. In fact, it's more a London banking sector that happens to be HQ'd in Scotland than anything. Have you, at the Treasury, there was some quotes this morning around about this, done any contingency planning about what a yes vote would mean for that Scottish banking sector?
There's been no contingency planning done. There'll be plenty of time for negotiations in the event of a yes vote. But on the question of the banking sector, what I'd say is this. Mervyn King, the former governor of the Bank of England, summed it up very nicely. He said that banks are international in life and national in death, or as we learned in the last few years in this country, near death. And you know, it was the taxpayers of the United Kingdom, and only of the United Kingdom, who recapitalised these banks in order to make sure that they could, you know, they were the sovereign that stood behind them. Now, for Scotland, we have a fantastic asset in the financial services sector in Scotland. It's responsible for the employment of 250,000 people or so in Scotland. These are institutions that serve customers across the whole of the United Kingdom, but based and employing lots of people in Edinburgh and in other parts of Scotland. And you know, we've heard some of them talking publicly about the possibility, like Standard Life, for example, the possibility that they might have to relocate their operations because, you know, being headquartered in one regulatory jurisdiction when 90% of your customers are in another is well, there are people from the banking sector who might want to comment on this, but you know, that's a pretty awkward position to be in. And so, you know, my argument is that financial services is one of a number of really key sectors in the Scottish economy that exist and thrive in Scotland, which is a wonderful thing, and I want them to grow in Scotland because we're part of a wider United Kingdom. You could say the same about renewable energy, you could say the same about defence and so on and so forth. But you know, independence would put a lot of that at risk.
Okay, some more questions. We have a gentleman, let's take, where's the microphone? If we can just come to the front, to the gentleman over there. At the back. Let's take this side first, yeah. So,
There's quite a few suddenly. Good, I'll make my answer short.
John Harmer, member of Chatham House. I'd just like to explore the effect on England after this, because it seems to me that...
Sorry, the effect of?
On England.
Effect on England, sorry, I didn't hear you.
If Scotland becomes independent, the Conservative Party will be far stronger than it is now. The Labour Party will practically wiped out, and the Liberal Party will, you'll lose your job. Can you comment on that?
Just the gentleman just there. Yeah, just.
My name is Pami Kanda, member Chatham House. I've just come down from the Highlands yesterday by train. I have a home there in King Craig. I think you know it well.
In my constituency. Very
That's
good.
right,
I'll talk to you later.
It's a small place, King Craig, and the thing I notice is that this is a very emotional issue. Now, my question is, taking on from the gentleman here and the lady there, is how do you heal the people after this? On the 19th of September, and come Hogmanay, what do you do? How do you heal the people? Do you have any idea on the 19th of September what you're going to do to bring people together?
Well, why don't we...
It doesn't matter. Whatever the outcome, whether yes or no, there are going to be a percentage, a sizable percentage of people who are going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
How do you heal these people?
So let's take Colin's question and that question, and also the implications for English Westminster politics as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question that Colin and yourself have just asked is really important. And it's true to say that these are issues that are very deeply felt, and there are strong views on either side. And, you know, I mean, I think it's very, very sad that in recent weeks we've seen some of that spill over into really unpleasant and unnecessary and sometimes very aggressive behaviour, and you know, deeply disappointing that some of that appears to have been orchestrated at a local level by the Yes campaign. There's no eggs in this room, but you know, and none of us should be afraid of the odd egg. I mean, I like eat eggs for breakfast, for breakfast mainly. But I think that we have to be really careful about the health of our democracy. because a profoundly important debate like this needs to be conducted in a way that everyone is respectful of one another's views. I might disagree profoundly with Alex Salmond, but I would defend to the death his right to be heard, just as I hope he would defend to the death my right to be heard. Because that, in the end, is the only way that you can have a thriving liberal democracy in which people can make these decisions in the right atmosphere. And I've been really struck going around the doors over the last few weeks and months by the number of people who have a view, but they don't want to tell you. They don't want, fine, people, by the way, people aren't obliged to express their view, but I was knocking on doors in Culloden, in my constituency, the site of, I think, the last pitched battle in the United Kingdom. I won't tell you whose side I would have been on then. And this lady came to the door, and I said, well, I'm, I think she recognized me, and I said, well, I'm on the no side of the argument. She closed the door very quietly behind us. I'm with you too, but I don't want my husband to know. He's a passionate yes man. That's fair enough. That's fine. But I think what I've been really struck by is the number of people who've said things like that. And you cannot have a proper debate in which some people, for whatever reason, and rightly or wrongly, feel intimidated or whatever. And I think there's a real obligation on all of us, on both sides of the argument, to try and conduct the debate in the respectful tones in this final period. And I think actually that will matter in terms of then the question about how do you bring people together afterwards. Of course, in politics, we're all used to robust debates, and we have general elections, and then we get on with the life after the result, and people are used to doing that. I think if there is as I hope and expect, a no vote, then it is profoundly important that we fulfil the obligations that we've undertaken to deliver the further powers for the Scottish Parliament that are part of, if you like, the offer, that we are able to, and that we do make the Scottish Parliament stronger. I believe in that as a liberal. I believe in a federal United Kingdom. I want to see power distributed and operated at the most appropriate level, whether that's European, UK, Scottish Parliament, or indeed local. And by the way, there's been quite a lot of centralisation within Scotland in recent years under the SNP, and I'd like to see some of that power handed back to communities, as well as power coming to the Scottish Parliament. So I think delivering on those things is right. I also think, whatever the result, no matter how tightly fought it is, we all have to accept the result, whatever it is, and get on and make the best of it.
There's no opportunity for slippage, renegotiation. I mean, if yes get 50+%, Scotland will be independent, guaranteed.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole basis on which this referendum was constructed, and there was a lot of negotiation about this, which led to the Edinburgh Agreement, was to have a referendum that was legal, decisive, and fair. And those three words are really important. That's why we had to have both governments negotiate it, so that it was legal. The referendum has a very simple question, because it is a decisive referendum. There's no going back on the result, and obviously it's in the same way that all elections are well regulated, so that the result is one that everyone knows has been conducted properly and is fair.
Just quickly, the implications for English politics, I presume in a yes vote.
I haven't spent a lot of time contemplating that matter. It seems like a. But I think there are lots of implications for England and for Wales and for Northern Ireland of this, and there's economic implications and there's political implications, and how politics then plays out is an interesting question. Though I also think the economic implications would be significant for the rest of the UK. If you've got this uncertainty and the damage caused to the Scottish economy, that inevitably has a knock-on effect to the rest of the UK as well. But the thing I've been really struck by is the number of voices in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, Conservative, Liberal, Labour, whatever, of no political abode, who just profoundly hope that the UK stays together. And I think that's a sentiment that we should hear more of from the rest of the UK over the last 2.5 weeks of the campaign.
If you win, do you think there's any read-through from the percentage that you get to the type of negotiation over Devo Max that you would have afterwards? Is there any sort of follow-through? So if the yes campaign falls below 40%, does that?
No, it doesn't
change the dynamic.
It doesn't at all, because each of the UK parties has set out their agenda for more powers. Okay. It's something that as Liberal Democrats we've argued for a long time. It's great that Labour and Conservatives in their different ways have caught up with that. So, you know, those plans are articulated, and we have to get on and deliver them after the election.
Okay, let's take some points with it.
And I'll be very brief, sorry.
Yeah, just in the front. I think that's Robin.
Robin Davis, member of Chatham House. If you say it's going to be very close, and I'd be distraught if the yes vote won, but if we get a close no vote, are we straight back within a very short period of time to yet again another referendum? And in that case, can you make the terms somewhat different? Because you say you had lots of discussion, but I think if yes had been better together, we'd have gained 2 points just that way. So that's my question. Will we have yet another referendum?
Just the gentleman with the orange tie. Can you pass him the mic? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Euripides, High Commissioner for Cyprus. I'm wondering if the no vote, you spoke about the evolution, giving more powers to Scotland. I'm wondering what would that do to the rest of the United Kingdom, and whether we are actually moving towards a federal United Kingdom or something like that?
Okay, thank you. Next, just the yellow tie.
Thank you. Derek Honeygold. I had a letter from our colleague Charles Kennedy last night asking for my views. And the first point I made was that we live in an increasingly interdependent world tied up with global value chains. And the whole idea of Scottish independence surely goes against this. We should be looking towards more transnational governance to control these sorts of developments. So that was the first point I made. And of course, it relates also to the fact that the global order is in a state of some decay. And again, we need transnational governance. And this is emerging in the present conflict. The second point, I think you've really covered. All I wanted to say was that I hadn't heard sufficient mention for my satisfaction about Dev Max in the no argument that we heard on television.
Okay.
Maybe but I'm observing from London and of course from a distance.
Do you want to take those three and we'll just get the microphone over?
So, in answer to Robin's question, will there be a sort of never-endum? I hope not. And in fairness, both sides have said they'll respect the result. I think this is a once-in-a-generation thing. And actually, if you look at what happened to Canada, you know, and I think it's known as the Montreal effect in terms of the impact it had on Quebec over a long period of time. You know, that prolonged constitutional uncertainty has a cost. So I think that having had this referendum, we should all accept the result and move on. The gentleman from Cyprus asking about does this mean a federal UK? I profoundly hope so. But you know, what happens in England and Wales and Northern Ireland is probably a matter for those places to think about.
Do you mean in English Parliament?
Well, as I was just saying, those are things that people in England need to work out. Okay. So, in this government, we have devolved more powers and responsibilities to local authorities in England. City deals have made cities much more powerful in England. That's a form of devolution. In Wales, we're moving towards tax-raising powers for the Welsh Assembly, subject to a referendum. And obviously, there's the agenda for further powers for the Scottish Parliament. And then, Derek, I totally agree with your point about we live in an interdependent world and independence goes against this. I actually think that there's a tide in history, human history, over a long period of time, which this august body has studied more closely than anybody, about, you know, over time removing barriers that exist between peoples and places. And I think that the United Kingdom is the most successful economic, political, monetary, social alliance between countries ever in the history of this planet. And to cast that aside would be rather bad.
It's a bold claim. Right, just let's
I defy anyone to contradict it.
Yes, briefly, Mr. Carl Wright, Commonwealth Local Government Forum. I very much agree with the last point you were making a minute ago, that importance of DevMax and devolution being looked at. And I think perhaps historically one of the problems with Scotland and indeed other parts of the UK has been the extreme centralisation of UK government within the context of the EU and even the Commonwealth. It's been one of the most centralised countries, and as you said, this has been addressed now through the city deals, through the new devolution, through the devolved assemblies. And I think what's missing in the debate, to my mind, has been the positive arguments, as Faisal was saying earlier, about some of the positive devolution that's going on, that's on offer and as you know, hopefully we'll hear a little bit more from you what precisely would be on offer if there was a no vote in terms of DevMax, because I think that ought to be put across more in the next week or so.
Great. Just the gentleman behind you.
Sorry, Ivan Sedgwick, member of Chatham House. Could I return you, please, to the Treasury and ask what the implications in a world without great borders to companies re-domiciling, the potential implications to a newly independent state tax revenue would be? How sensitive are they?
Nice.
Good question. And one I could take up several paragraphs
No, well,
answering, but
let's
I'll try
not
and
do that. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes.
Try and be brief. I mean, firstly, on the question about more powers and what does it look like, to my mind, in the context of the Scottish Parliament, the big gap is financial accountability. The Scottish Parliament spends money that comes through a block grant. It should have more responsibility for raising that money. So from next year, every Scot will pay a Scottish rate of income tax that will go to help pay for the work of the Scottish Parliament. I want to go further. I'd like to see full responsibility for income tax in the hands of the devolved government in Scotland, and responsibility for other personal taxes too, so that the Scottish Parliament is responsible for raising the majority of the resources that it's responsible for spending. That's proper accountability and responsibility, to my mind, as well as more powerful economic levers. Of course, you're right, companies re-domiciling does have an effect on tax revenues. It also has an effect on the location of employment. And I mean, several companies have commented on this. I don't really need to add to that in the context of the Scottish debate. And we're also, as a UK government, one of the lead sponsors of work in the OECD on so-called base erosion and profit shifting, to try and make sure that we have a proper international framework for making sure that companies pay tax in the right place.
Okay, just there's 2 questions over here. Does Stephanie want to bring in some stuff from the
Yep,
from
I've
the
got a
web?
tweet from Professor Richard McAllister, Edinburgh Uni. When and urgently is Danny Alexander's message going to get to the electorate rather than already converted audience of Chatham House members?
Ooh, a low blow. Just and then there's 2 over here, and there's a microphone over on this side.
Every day, that's the answer to that.
Okay. There's just 2 just at the front here. Gentleman in blue. A gentleman in the green shirt. Yep.
Thank you, David Farley, member of Chatham House. I was wondering whether you could say something about, particularly given the title, defence and the nuclear deterrent particularly. If it's the bedrock of our British defence, it seems a bit of a problem if Scotland votes yes.
Okay, quick answer to that, and we'll get the microphone over just the other side for the last 2 questions as well.
So, in answer to the question from the internet, or not from the internet, but from the gentleman who communicated with you that way. I mean, I'm doing meetings almost every day. I had public meetings in Inverness last week, in Kingussie in my constituency. I've held meetings in all sorts of communities. So, day and daily, I'm doing that. So please reassure by reply your correspondent. And say, actually, one of the things I've enjoyed about this debate in Scotland is the way that it's almost kind of reinventing an older style of politics. That's the good side of it, which is people are interested to come out and hear politicians directly rather than getting all of their news through Faisal. Important as a channel of communication, though he undoubtedly is. And information, of course, not just communication. I mean, the defence issues are really important. And there are defence issues for Scotland in terms of how would it go about putting together a defence force and a defence industry and all that sort of thing. There are defence issues about the nuclear deterrent, which would have to be addressed in the event of a yes vote, though I'm quite sure that the rest of the UK would continue to want to retain a nuclear deterrent, and so appropriate arrangements would have to be put in place. There are also big implications for the defence industry in Scotland. Scotland has actually a very strong defence sector, much of which depends on orders from the Ministry of Defence for providing things that are sovereign capabilities for the UK. And if Scotland is outside the UK, then, as many countries do, you would keep those orders within your own borders.
Just 2 quick points at the back, and I think we're going to have to wrap up after that. Yeah.
Hello, Leon Forrest, Chatham House member and graduate student here in London. Along with defence, you had commented earlier on how Scotland has a sizable presence in the military. In the event of a yes vote, what would the case for them be? Would they have to finish their service to the Crown, or have the right to refer back or defer back to the
And I think there was a question behind you as well. Yeah.
Hi, Agnes Frimston, The World Today at Chatham House. If Scotland does vote yes, that will mean David Cameron is the Prime Minister that lost the Union. Should he resign?
Oh, lovely last question.
Well, he's quite rightly said that he wouldn't. Because, look, this is a democratic decision. We've taken the step to enable a referendum to happen. The job of all of us is to make our arguments as strongly as we can, but to accept the democratic verdict in the way that it's delivered. In terms of the military point, I can't give you a clear answer to that. It's one of many detailed questions that in the event of independence would have to be negotiated. And in a sense, it's just a reflection of the huge range of issues that would need to be considered, which are very, very complex in such negotiations. So I'm sorry not to give you a clear answer.
So it's 2 minutes past. Just one general last point here. A lot of the issues that have to be discussed in this debate and that have been discussed in the central plank of actually the Better Together campaign, they're quite complicated, aren't they? They're quite complex. Do you fear that, in fact, you've made this technical argument that plays out in The Economist and the FT and maybe even on Sky News, but one that hasn't, it's a similar question, just hasn't cut through emotionally, and it's a lot, and if you're a young Scot, it's just like, this is our chance. This is our chance. We're sovereign for one day on the 18th of September. We can make this decision and nobody else can interfere with it. It's quite tempting.
Well, I don't think they're complicated arguments, yeah. And I trust to the good sense of my fellow countrymen and women that people really do have a sense of what's at stake here. Yeah. And I think that in the end, this is about some really simple, on the economic side, about some really simple issues about jobs and opportunities for young people and for everybody, about cost of living, the prices in the shops, and how much tax do I pay, and how much do I pay for my mortgage, and all those sorts of things. And if I was back in Lochaber High School in Fort William in the late 1980s, and this was going on, the questions about what job am I going to be able to do, what are the opportunities going to be for me, those aren't just dry economic questions. Those are profoundly personal, emotional questions. But I also think that the positive argument for the UK, the positive argument about the best of both worlds, about our shared history and so on, those are also very emotional things. When I was going back and forth to school in Fort William from Invergarry, bus journey every day, twice a day, took me past a place called Spian Bridge. Some of you may have been there. The Commando Memorial, which is a memorial which remembers the contribution made by young men from Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland who came to the Highlands to train for one of our most elite military units to go and help liberate Europe. And some of them made the ultimate sacrifice in doing so. The epitaph on that monument says, "United we conquer." And to me, that is one of the most profound things that reflects on our deep history, our shared endeavour and contribution over many years as the United Kingdom, which makes me say, I think we're better together.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Danny Alexander, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, for your time. I know you're back up to Scotland to continue this debate amongst actually a more important audience who actually have votes. But I'm sure the good burghers of Chatham House are delighted to get insight into your thinking at such an important time. So thank you very much. Please thank the Chief Secretary. Thank you.